Welcome back to the channel. Everyone, I have a question for you. Have you ever felt like, no matter how much you achieve, something just feels missing? Like, you're constantly striving, but never truly satisfied? Well, you're not alone. In today's video, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and, at times, unsettling philosophies ever put forth, the teachings of Arthur Schopenhauer. If you've ever wondered why life sometimes feels like an endless cycle of desire and disappointment, or why happiness can often feel like a fleeting illusion, then you're in for a ride. Schopenhauer's views on human existence may be more relevant today than ever before. We'll explore how his belief that life is essentially suffering can actually provide a surprising path to peace and even freedom. But before we jump in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps this channel grow. And trust me, you don't want to miss the deep dives we have coming up. And if you love this content and want to help us create more videos like this, consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. It helps us bring more thought-provoking ideas your way. So, let's get started. What if everything we're chasing, wealth, success, even love, might actually be the source of our suffering? Could Schopenhauer's theory give us the key to escape this endless cycle? Stick with me, and let's find out. Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophical vision, often categorized as deeply pessimistic, invites us to face the inherent suffering of life head-on. His worldview is not one that seeks to sugarcoat human existence or offer a path to endless happiness. Instead, it challenges us to confront the nature of human experience and recognize that suffering is not only unavoidable but fundamental to our being. In this perspective, Schopenhauer's thoughts on life offer a stark contrast to many of the more optimistic philosophies that dominate popular thought today. But they also hold profound insights that continue to resonate across time. His ideas, grounded in the belief that the human condition is defined by an endless cycle of striving, shed light on the darker, but undeniably real, aspects of existence. But in this bleakness, there's also an invitation to explore a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. The concept of suffering is central to Schopenhauer's philosophy, and for him, it is not simply a byproduct of life, but rather its very essence. According to Schopenhauer, the fundamental driving force in life is a ceaseless, blind will, a striving that propels all living beings toward survival, reproduction, and the satisfaction of endless desires. This constant striving, however, is an unrelenting source of suffering. It's not just that we encounter suffering from time to time. It is an intrinsic part of the way our desires are structured. When we fulfill one desire, another immediately takes its place, creating an unbroken cycle of craving, attainment, and dissatisfaction. For Schopenhauer, every desire springs from a lack, whether it be the hunger for food, the longing for companionship, or the pursuit of fame and wealth. In the absence of these desires, Schopenhauer suggests, we would experience a state of boredom, anxiety, or even despair, as the mind seeks to fill the vacuum left by unmet needs. This constant state of wanting and striving, Schopenhauer argues, is not only the source of personal frustration, but also the root cause of conflict in the world. Every organism is driven by the will to live, which manifests in an endless battle for resources and survival. This view of the world as a battleground where all living beings are engaged in a struggle for existence has striking parallels to the modern theories of natural selection and survival of the fittest. But Schopenhauer's insights predate these scientific discoveries by over a century. Schopenhauer's take on the nature of desire challenges the assumption that fulfillment leads to lasting happiness. The moment we achieve one goal, the thrill of success dissipates almost immediately, only to be replaced by the desire for something else. In his view, human beings are locked in a cycle of suffering that can never be fully escaped. Happiness, in this context, becomes an illusion, a fleeting and ultimately unsatisfying byproduct of temporary achievement. Even moments of peace or satisfaction are short-lived. As the cycle of desire reawakens, Schopenhauer believed that the true nature of happiness was not found in the attainment of fleeting goals, but in the cessation of desire itself. This belief led him to explore ways in which individuals might escape the cycle of endless striving and, in doing so, alleviate their suffering. One of the key ways Schopenhauer believed we could find relief from the burden of our desires was through aesthetic experiences engaging with art, music, and nature in a way that takes us beyond the limitations of our personal will. In these moments of aesthetic appreciation, Schopenhauer suggested, we experience a temporary escape from the ceaseless striving that defines human existence. When we lose ourselves in the beauty of a painting, a piece of music, or a natural landscape, we momentarily transcend our individual desires and experience a form of peace. This escape is brief, but Schopenhauer argued that it offers a glimpse of a higher state of being, one that is free from the relentless pursuit of personal gain. Art, in Schopenhauer's philosophy, becomes a way to temporarily silence the inner turmoil caused by the will. For a short period, we are able to step outside the boundaries of our desires and experience something greater than ourselves. In these moments, Schopenhauer saw the potential for profound transcendence. However, he did not see this as a permanent solution to suffering, merely as a respite from it. True liberation, Schopenhauer argued, could only be achieved through the renunciation of the will itself. This is where his philosophy diverges from more conventional forms of escapism. Instead of seeking pleasure in fleeting moments of relief, Schopenhauer proposed that we should cultivate a deep detachment from our desires and seek a life of asceticism, where we renounce our attachment to the things of the world. Asceticism, in Schopenhauer's view, was the key to breaking free from the cycle of desire and suffering. By embracing self-denial, we could learn to detach ourselves from the ego and its endless cravings. This process of detachment, Schopenhauer argued, is not about denying ourselves the pleasures of life for their own sake, but rather about transcending the self-centered desires that keep us trapped in suffering. The idea of asceticism has a long tradition in many spiritual and philosophical practices. From Buddhist monks who live in strict poverty and celibacy to Christian saints who renounce worldly pleasures in pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. Schopenhauer's notion of asceticism, however, was not strictly religious, but rather a philosophical approach to life, one that saw the world as inherently flawed and suffering, and therefore not worth clinging to. Schopenhauer's radical view of life as suffering, driven by an unconscious and blind will, has been incredibly influential throughout history. Friedrich Nietzsche, who admired Schopenhauer's deep insight into the human condition, was profoundly influenced by his work. Although Nietzsche ultimately rejected Schopenhauer's solution of renouncing desire, Nietzsche, while acknowledging the suffering that Schopenhauer identified, chose instead to embrace life fully, even in the face of its inevitable pain and suffering. For Nietzsche, the key to transcending suffering was not through withdrawal or renunciation, but through the affirmation of life as it is, in all its tragedy and absurdity. Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power represents a stark contrast to Schopenhauer's will to live, where Schopenhauer saw suffering as inescapable and fundamental to existence. Nietzsche sought to empower individuals to embrace their struggles and grow from them. Carl Jung, too, found inspiration in Schopenhauer's ideas, particularly the notion that suffering is an intrinsic part of the human experience. Jung recognized that, like Schopenhauer, he could not ignore the darker aspects of the psyche, but he also believed that confronting and integrating these aspects could lead to greater self-awareness and transformation. Jung's concept of individuation, which involves the integration of the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self, echoes Schopenhauer's emphasis on introspection and self-awareness as a means of transcending suffering. However, unlike Schopenhauer, Jung did not see the complete renunciation of desires as the answer. Instead, he believed that embracing and understanding our desires, rather than repressing them, could lead to a deeper sense of meaning and wholeness. Despite Schopenhauer's pessimism, his philosophy offers a unique way of understanding human existence. While many may balk at the idea that suffering is the essence of life, Schopenhauer's view forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality of our condition. His insistence on the inevitability of suffering and the limitations of human knowledge challenges us to rethink our approach to life. Instead of running away from pain and hardship, Schopenhauer urges us to accept them as part of the human experience. This acceptance, however, does not mean resignation. Instead, it offers a way to approach life with a deeper understanding and perhaps even a sense of peace. At its core, Schopenhauer's philosophy is a call to accept the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. His teachings encourage us to look at life in a more honest and unflinching way, without the rose-colored glasses of idealism. While this view may seem grim or bleak, it offers a kind of clarity that is often missing in more optimistic philosophies. Schopenhauer's pessimism is not a fatalistic surrender but a challenge to live with awareness of the inherent suffering of life, to face that suffering without illusion, and to find meaning in spite of it. Schopenhauer's work reminds us that suffering is not something that can be easily avoided or overcome, but rather something we must learn to live with. It is in this living with suffering, rather than in the denial of it, that we may find the wisdom that Schopenhauer offers. At the age of 21, Friedrich Nietzsche encountered Arthur Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation in a small bookstore, an event he later described as one of profound significance in his life. It was a moment that Nietzsche believed was almost predestined, where his encounter with Schopenhauer's philosophy acted as a catalyst, shaping his entire worldview. Schopenhauer's ideas about suffering, its inescapability and ubiquity resonated deeply with Nietzsche, marking a transformative shift in his thinking. Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer, recognized that life is fraught with suffering, but Schopenhauer's outlook offered something more. It suggested that suffering is not some cruel exception or a series of unfortunate events, but rather the essence of existence itself. This stark recognition would go on to influence not only Nietzsche but also many other intellectuals, most notably Carl Jung, who too found profound value in Schopenhauer's treatment of human suffering. Schopenhauer's philosophy begins with the acceptance of suffering as not just a feature of human life, but as its very structure. For Schopenhauer, suffering is an inevitable consequence of existence because life itself is driven by an insatiable will. The will, a metaphysical force that underpins all life, pushes creatures to perpetually strive toward desires that are never truly satisfied. At the core of Schopenhauer's thinking is the notion that human beings are not masters of their own destiny. Rather, they are subject to an endless cycle of wants and needs that can never fully be fulfilled. For Schopenhauer, the moment one desire is satisfied, another immediately replaces it, and the cycle begins anew. This ceaseless striving, this will to live, leads inevitably to suffering. It's not just that we experience pain from time to time. The very process of desiring is a form of suffering. The desire is a state of lack and acknowledgement that something is missing, whether it's food, love, success, or self-fulfillment. This constant state of lack creates a fundamental tension within human experience, and Schopenhauer suggests that the only way to escape this cycle is to renounce the will itself, to detach from the desires that bind us to a life of suffering. Nietzsche, in his youth, found Schopenhauer's philosophy appealing because it validated his own observations about life. Nietzsche was aware of the harshness and cruelty of existence, but Schopenhauer's bold assertion that suffering is a necessary part of life gave Nietzsche a framework to understand it. Nietzsche was drawn to the idea that suffering is not an accidental part of the human condition, but is rather woven into the fabric of existence itself. Schopenhauer, in Nietzsche's eyes, provided a clear-eyed view of the world that did not try to mask the inevitable pain of life. Nietzsche, at this stage, was already struggling with his own personal crises, his physical ailments, his sense of alienation, and the overwhelming sense of purposelessness that can arise when one confronts the depth of human suffering. Schopenhauer's philosophy provided Nietzsche with a vocabulary and a framework for understanding these struggles in a way that gave them meaning. But Nietzsche's relationship with Schopenhauer's ideas was complicated. While Nietzsche initially embraced Schopenhauer's view of suffering as a central part of human existence, he eventually grew disillusioned with Schopenhauer's solution. Schopenhauer advocated for a renunciation of the will, a rejection of life's desires, and an embrace of asceticism as a way to escape suffering. Schopenhauer's philosophy suggested that the only way to transcend suffering was to detach oneself from the ceaseless striving of the will. Nietzsche, however, rejected this asceticism. He saw it as a form of denial, a refusal to affirm life in all its complexities, including its pain. Nietzsche would go on to develop his own philosophy, one that sought to embrace suffering rather than escape from it. He introduced the concept of amor fati, the love of fate, where one does not simply endure suffering but actively embraces it as an essential part of life. Nietzsche believed that true strength lies not in renouncing suffering but in affirming it and using it as a vehicle for personal growth and transformation. Carl Jung, a contemporary of Nietzsche, was similarly influenced by Schopenhauer's philosophy. Jung found resonance in Schopenhauer's acknowledgement that suffering is not just a transient issue but an intrinsic part of life. For Jung, Schopenhauer's philosophy provided an early intellectual foundation for his later work on the psyche. Jung appreciated Schopenhauer's willingness to confront the darker aspects of existence, aspects that many others sought to deny or gloss over. Schopenhauer's focus on the inevitability of suffering was not merely pessimistic for Jung, but offered a kind of clarity, a realistic view of life that didn't shy away from its inherent pain and struggles. Jung would later apply this idea to his theories of the unconscious and the process of individuation, where he suggested that one must confront the darker aspects of the self in order to grow and evolve. For Jung, Schopenhauer's ideas about suffering provided a roadmap for understanding the deeper layers of the human psyche and how they manifest in our thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. Schopenhauer's profound exploration of human suffering stands in contrast to more optimistic views of existence that are often prevalent in modern thinking. The dominant cultural narrative in many parts of the world encourages the belief that life can and should be free from suffering. The pursuit of happiness and self-actualization is often seen as the highest goal, with suffering considered a temporary obstacle to overcome. Schopenhauer's philosophy, however, offers a radically different perspective. Rather than seeking to overcome suffering, Schopenhauer advocates for an acceptance of it as part of the human condition. In his view, suffering is not something to be fought against, but something to be understood and transcended. The recognition that life is filled with suffering can, paradoxically, provide a sense of peace. By acknowledging the inevitability of suffering, we can stop resisting it and begin to navigate it with greater wisdom and resilience. Schopenhauer's discovery of the nature of suffering as an inherent part of existence also introduces a deeper philosophical problem: the question of meaning. If suffering is intrinsic to human life, then how can life itself have meaning? Schopenhauer did not shy away from this question, but rather embraced it. For him, meaning is not found in the external world through wealth, fame, or success, but in our relationship to suffering itself. He suggested that the key to transcending suffering is not to escape it, but to transform our understanding of it. One of the ways to do this, Schopenhauer believed, was through art. Aesthetic experiences, whether through music, painting, or nature, provide temporary relief from suffering by allowing us to step outside of ourselves and experience a state of pure contemplation, free from the demands of the will. Schopenhauer's philosophy posits that moments of aesthetic experience offer a temporary liberation from the endless striving of life's desires. This brief reprieve from the pain of existence provides a glimpse into a different kind of reality, one that exists beyond the constraints of personal desire and suffering. While Schopenhauer's ideas about suffering and the will to live deeply influenced Nietzsche and Jung, they also shaped a broader tradition of existential and psychological thought. His influence can be seen in the works of other thinkers who grappled with the problem of suffering, including existentialists such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. Both Sartre and Camus were concerned with the absurdity of existence and the inevitability of suffering, but they took a different approach than Schopenhauer. Sartre, for instance, rejected the idea of a predetermined essence and emphasized the importance of personal freedom and responsibility. Camus, similarly, argued that the search for meaning in an indifferent universe is ultimately futile, but that we must continue to search for meaning anyway, embracing life in spite of its inherent absurdity. Both of these thinkers grappled with Schopenhauer's central insight that suffering is an unavoidable part of existence, but sought to find meaning in a world that seemed devoid of it. Ultimately, Schopenhauer's exploration of human suffering presents a profound challenge to the way we think about life. It asks us to look beyond the superficial distractions of happiness and success and to confront the fundamental realities of existence. Schopenhauer offers no easy answers, no promises of eternal bliss, but instead invites us to live in full awareness of suffering and to find meaning in its very presence. In his view, suffering is not a curse to be avoided, but a truth to be understood, a challenge to be faced. By accepting the reality of suffering, we can, in Schopenhauer's view, come closer to a deeper understanding of life and, perhaps, even achieve a kind of peace in the process. Schopenhauer's notion of the will to live lies at the heart of his philosophy, offering a profound and unsettling perspective on the nature of existence. In its essence, the will to live is not a conscious or rational force, but an unconscious, blind drive that propels all living things toward survival and reproduction. This will is a metaphysical force that underpins every aspect of life, from the simplest biological impulse to the most complex human desires and actions. It is an all-consuming force, one that exists independently of reason or moral consideration, and it drives not just human behavior but the entire natural world. Schopenhauer's insight that the will to live is the core of existence challenges much of our conventional understanding of life, purpose, and suffering. It forces us to confront the idea that the forces that shape our lives are not governed by reason or any higher moral authority, but are instead governed by a relentless, blind striving. To understand Schopenhauer's concept of the will to live, it's useful to consider its manifestation in our daily lives. At a surface level, the will to live manifests in the constant striving that defines much of modern existence, the pursuit of wealth, status, love, security, and power. These desires, in all their varied forms, are ultimately expressions of this singular driving force. For example, consider the modern obsession with success. In the fast-paced, competitive world we live in, people often work tirelessly to attain financial prosperity, social recognition, and career success. This striving is rarely, if ever, questioned. We tend to think of it as natural, as the very foundation of a meaningful life. But from Schopenhauer's perspective, this ceaseless pursuit of success, whether it's climbing the corporate ladder or acquiring material wealth, is not part of a grand design. It is simply the will to live expressing itself through human desires, regardless of the consequences or the ultimate fulfillment of those desires. Think about the way people often talk about their ambitions. We are conditioned to believe that achieving wealth, fame, or personal success will bring fulfillment and happiness. This belief is deeply ingrained in modern society, with messages of self-improvement, hustle culture, and the dream of success constantly reinforced in social media, advertisements, and the popular culture. Yet, according to Schopenhauer, even when we achieve these goals, they only create new desires. Once a person has reached a certain level of financial success, they often find themselves desiring something more, a bigger house, a faster car, more recognition. This is the cyclical nature of the will to live, a force that perpetually drives us toward new desires without ever offering true satisfaction. The will to live is not just about material desires. It also governs the emotional and psychological realms of human existence. People strive for love, companionship, and connection, believing that these relationships will offer them fulfillment. Yet, even the desire for love is driven by the same unconscious force, the pursuit of a romantic relationship, the need for approval from others, the longing for a sense of belonging. These are all forms of the will to live manifesting in the emotional lives of individuals. But, as anyone who has experienced heartbreak or the dissolution of a friendship can attest, the satisfaction derived from these relationships is often fleeting. Relationships bring joy and connection, but they also bring conflict, misunderstanding, and heartache. From Schopenhauer's perspective, this emotional turbulence is the result of the very nature of existence itself, the will to live that compels us to seek out relationships, only to have them inevitably marred by suffering. The will to live also operates on a much larger scale, shaping the trajectory of human history and the conflicts that define it. Schopenhauer saw the will to live as a force behind the aggression, violence, and competition that so often characterize human society. Human beings, driven by the will to live, compete for resources, power, and survival. The result is war, exploitation, and suffering on a global scale. From Schopenhauer's perspective, these conflicts are not the result of human malice or a desire for power alone. Rather, they are the manifestation of the will to live, a blind, unrelenting force that drives nations, groups, and individuals to perpetuate cycles of violence and conflict, even when they result in immense suffering. In this way, the will to live helps explain not just individual suffering but the suffering of societies and civilizations throughout history, whether it's the devastation of war or the systemic inequalities that fuel social unrest. The will to live is the force behind these tragic events. Schopenhauer's view of the will to live as a blind, unconscious force that drives all living things toward survival and reproduction also speaks to the cruelty inherent in nature itself. Nature, as Schopenhauer saw it, is not a harmonious system of order and beauty, as many philosophers and theologians have described it. Instead, it is a chaotic, violent, and indifferent force. The survival of the fittest, the concept that only the strongest, most adaptable individuals or species survive, is a manifestation of the will to live. Animals, plants, and even humans are caught in this brutal struggle, constantly striving to survive and reproduce. But this struggle is not guided by any higher moral principle or rational purpose. It is simply the will to live, pushing each organism toward survival at any cost. For Schopenhauer, this view of nature's cruelty was not just an abstract philosophical observation, but a fundamental truth about the world we inhabit. Nature is a place of suffering, and the very process of life itself is a process of constant striving, conflict, and, ultimately, death. This view of existence, with its focus on the relentless, unconscious will to live, offers a stark contrast to more optimistic views of life that are often espoused in Western philosophy and culture. In these more optimistic traditions, life is often seen as something to be embraced and celebrated, a gift that offers potential for growth, meaning, and happiness. Philosophers like Aristotle or modern thinkers who focus on well-being and self-actualization often argue that human beings can find purpose and fulfillment through the pursuit of knowledge, virtue, or happiness. However, Schopenhauer's view is far bleaker. He suggests that the very structure of existence is built upon a foundation of suffering, driven by the blind will to live. There is no inherent purpose to our striving, no grand design or moral order that guides our actions. Life is a never-ending struggle, driven by forces beyond our control, and no matter how much we achieve or acquire, we will always find ourselves striving for something else. One way in which Schopenhauer suggested we might come to terms with this unrelenting drive is through the recognition of the will's fundamental nature. Rather than trying to escape or deny the will, Schopenhauer proposed that we might find some degree of peace in simply understanding and accepting the will's power over our lives. This is not to say that Schopenhauer advocated for passivity or resignation, but rather that by acknowledging the will to live as the driving force behind human behavior, we might begin to approach life with a clearer, more detached perspective. We might learn to stop expecting satisfaction from the things we desire and instead recognize that the act of desiring itself is the source of much of our suffering. In this sense, Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a way of coming to terms with life's inherent pain, not by denying it, but by fully accepting it as an unavoidable part of existence. Schopenhauer's concept of the will to live also introduces the idea of the will to die. If life is driven by an endless and unconscious will to survive, then death, in Schopenhauer's view, represents a cessation of this will. Death, therefore, is not to be feared or avoided at all costs, but rather accepted as the inevitable end of the will's relentless striving. Schopenhauer's view of death is neither nihilistic nor romantic. It is simply a natural conclusion to the will's endless drive. In this way, Schopenhauer provides a framework for understanding death not as an escape from suffering, but as a natural part of the cycle of existence. Ultimately, Schopenhauer's concept of the will to live challenges us to confront the fundamental nature of our existence. It invites us to recognize that the constant striving we experience is not the result of some external force or societal expectation, but is rooted in the very fabric of life itself. The will to live, in its blind and relentless nature, shapes our desires, our actions, and our suffering. Through understanding this force, Schopenhauer believed that we might gain a deeper, more realistic understanding of existence. In accepting the will's power, we might find a way to navigate the turbulence of life with greater clarity and perhaps even find some semblance of peace within the chaos. Schopenhauer's philosophical view on the struggle for survival and reproduction cuts through the comforting layers of romanticized existence. His view of life as a constant battle driven by the unconscious will to live paints a bleak, yet profoundly insightful picture of the world around us. This struggle for survival and reproduction is not just a human issue, but a universal law that applies to all living creatures, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal. At its core, Schopenhauer's argument is simple yet sobering. The driving force behind all life, whether human or non-human, is the instinctual need to preserve itself and propagate its species. It's this relentless, blind striving that defines existence. The philosopher was clear in his assertion. Nature's ultimate goal for all living beings, including humans, is not grand achievement, spiritual enlightenment, or moral growth, but basic survival and reproduction. What nature aims at and attains in man is essentially the same as in brutes: nourishment and propagation. Schopenhauer wrote, "This reductionist view, while disheartening, is not without its merit. It strips away any pretension about human life's higher meaning, presenting the basic biological instincts as the foundational forces that guide human behavior, just as they guide the behavior of other species. In this light, human civilization, with all its intellectual achievements, cultural pursuits, and philosophical reflections, can appear as little more than a sophisticated extension of the basic, animalistic struggle for survival." To Schopenhauer, these higher pursuits are, in essence, secondary to the primal, unconscious forces that underlie all of life. The implications of this perspective are profound, and they challenge much of the optimism embedded in traditional Western thought. For centuries, thinkers from Aristotle to contemporary philosophers have suggested that human beings have a higher purpose or function, that our lives can be guided by reason, morality, or the pursuit of happiness. In contrast, Schopenhauer's worldview strips these assumptions away. He presents a vision of life where the essence of being is to strive, to struggle, and ultimately to suffer, driven by forces beyond our control. The endless striving for survival and reproduction forms the basis of his argument that suffering is not an anomaly in the human condition, but rather a fundamental part of the natural world. When we zoom out and look at the broader picture, Schopenhauer's philosophy resonates with the harsh realities of nature. The natural world is not some idyllic, harmonious paradise, as poets like William Blake or theologians like St. Augustine might have imagined. Instead, it is a brutal, chaotic, and indifferent place where life is a constant struggle for survival. Consider the insect world. For example, in the wild, insects face a constant battle for resources, with survival often determined by speed, strength, or cunning. Ants, for instance, engage in complex, often brutal battles with other colonies over territory, food, or mates. Their lives are consumed by the relentless drive to gather resources, protect their colony, and reproduce. They are driven not by conscious thought, but by an inherent, blind will to live. This struggle is not unlike the broader human experience, where people fight for success, wealth, or influence, often at great personal cost. Birds, too, provide another vivid example of nature's indifference to the suffering of individual lives. In the harsh winter months, many birds find it difficult to survive due to the scarcity of food. Starvation, predation, and the brutal cold take their toll, with only the fittest surviving to see the spring. There is no moral framework guiding this process, just an unrelenting, natural force that determines who will survive and who will perish. For Schopenhauer, the cold indifference of nature is not some philosophical abstraction, but the painful truth of existence. The pursuit of survival is a never-ending battle where suffering is not incidental but intrinsic to the struggle itself. The struggle for survival also plays out on a grander scale in the aquatic world. Consider the example of fish living in polluted waters, their habitats slowly being destroyed by human industrialization. In such conditions, the fish are forced into a constant battle for survival. Pollutants choke their environment, depleting oxygen levels and disrupting the food chain. Many species face the harsh reality of having to adapt to an ever-changing environment or perish. The instinct to survive is no less profound for them than it is for any other living creature. Schopenhauer's point is that this instinctual drive to live, which compels even fish to adapt or die, is not a conscious choice but a blind force that shapes the course of life itself. Whether it's humans grappling with their desires and ambitions or animals struggling for food and territory, all life is driven by the same primal need to survive. And in that struggle lies the heart of suffering. This struggle for survival is deeply tied to Schopenhauer's larger metaphysical framework, where the will to live operates as a blind, unconscious force. Unlike the classical understanding of will, which often implies intentionality, purpose, and rationality, Schopenhauer's will to live is devoid of consciousness or agency. It is not something we control, nor is it something we can escape. It is, in essence, a primal, biological force that drives everything from the simplest organisms to the most complex human beings. The will to live operates through all living creatures as an instinctual force, shaping behavior in a way that transcends reason or morality. This concept of a blind, unconscious will is at odds with much of human culture and philosophy, which is often based on the idea of free will, the notion that individuals have the capacity to make choices and direct their lives toward higher purposes. In contrast, Schopenhauer's view is that the will is an unconscious, relentless force that drives life. Irrespective of human reason or morality, our desires for wealth, power, love, and status are not the product of rational thought, but are manifestations of this deeper, primal drive to survive and propagate. In this view, even the most abstract or spiritual pursuits like the search for meaning or enlightenment are simply other forms of this will, disguised as higher aspirations. This perspective on survival and reproduction as the ultimate drivers of behavior raises significant ethical and philosophical questions. If all life is bound by this unrelenting drive for survival, then what does this mean for human behavior, morality, and social systems? Schopenhauer's philosophy suggests that much of what we deem to be virtuous or meaningful may be mere byproducts of this blind striving. In human society, we may believe we are acting based on ideals of justice, kindness, or moral integrity, but Schopenhauer would argue that these actions are often motivated by the same instinctual drive for survival that governs all life. For instance, acts of charity or kindness, which seem to go beyond mere survival, might, according to Schopenhauer, still be rooted in the desire to ensure one's own psychological well-being or reputation, forms of self-preservation. The implications of Schopenhauer's ideas extend beyond individuals to entire societies and civilizations. Nations, just like individuals, are caught in the same cycle of striving for survival, often manifested in competition for resources, political power, or military dominance. Historical conflicts, whether wars, colonization, or economic competition, are not just the result of human greed or malice, but, in Schopenhauer's view, the inevitable outcome of the universal will to live. Just as an individual might fight to secure their own survival, so too do nations, driven by the same unconscious will, clash with one another in a struggle for dominance or security. In this sense, history is not a story of progress or moral evolution, but a narrative of constant conflict, competition, and suffering, driven by forces that transcend individual or national will. This view of existence might seem hopeless or pessimistic, but it also offers a certain clarity. By acknowledging that the struggle for survival is the core of all life, we are forced to confront the true nature of existence, one that is indifferent to our suffering and aspirations. In recognizing the blind will that drives our lives, we might find a way to approach life with a certain detachment or acceptance. Schopenhauer's philosophy invites us to question the endless striving for success, wealth, and status, suggesting that these pursuits are ultimately futile in the face of the inevitable suffering that defines existence. Rather than seeking fulfillment through external achievements, Schopenhauer urges us to seek inner peace by understanding the nature of our desires and the role that the will to live plays in shaping them. In a world obsessed with progress and success, Schopenhauer's insights offer a radically different perspective, one that challenges the dominant narratives of personal achievement and self-actualization. By accepting the truth of life's struggle for survival and reproduction, we may be able to transcend the constant cycle of desire and suffering and approach life with a sense of acceptance, clarity, and, perhaps, peace. It is not the absence of striving that Schopenhauer advocates, but a deeper understanding of the forces at play in our lives, and the recognition that true peace may be found not in the pursuit of external goals, but in the acceptance of the intrinsic nature of existence itself. Schopenhauer's exploration into the nature of existence led him to a profound and unsettling conclusion: the illusion of individuality. This idea, while challenging to grasp, serves as one of the most central and insightful components of his philosophy. According to Schopenhauer, the boundaries that we perceive between ourselves and the rest of the world, the sense of separateness that makes us feel like distinct individuals, are nothing more than mere appearances. These distinctions are not grounded in any fundamental reality. They are fabrications of the mind, created by our limited perception of the world. To understand this, we must first delve into Schopenhauer's metaphysical framework. For him, the world we experience is shaped by a deeper, more fundamental force, the will to live. This will is an unconscious, blind force that manifests in all living things, and it drives every action, every desire, and every thought. While we may experience ourselves as isolated, autonomous beings with individual will and purpose, Schopenhauer argues that this sense of individuality is illusory. At the deepest level, all beings are simply manifestations of the same underlying will, which is one and indivisible. The experience of individuality, according to Schopenhauer, arises from the way our minds interpret the world. The human mind, in its limited capacity, divides reality into discrete objects, people, and events, creating the illusion of separation. But this separation is not real. Just as waves on the ocean appear distinct from one another, yet are all part of the same body of water, individual beings are expressions of the same will. The sense that we are separate from one another, that we are independent entities with unique identities, is simply a projection of our consciousness onto a reality that, in essence, has no such divisions. This idea of the illusion of individuality bears a striking resemblance to the concept of Maya in Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. Maya refers to the illusion or appearance of the material world, which we perceive as separate and distinct from ourselves, yet is, in truth, part of a unified cosmic whole. In this sense, Schopenhauer's philosophy shares much with Eastern thought, where the belief is that the separation we feel between ourselves and others is an illusion, and true wisdom lies in recognizing our interconnectedness. For Schopenhauer, suffering is a key part of this realization. Just as the individual waves of the ocean rise and fall, each experiencing its own form of existence, so too do individual lives struggle, strive, and suffer, each caught in the current of the will to live. However, this suffering is not isolated to any one individual. Instead, it is a universal force, playing out in the lives of all beings, shaping and defining existence itself. The will to live drives all life, but it also perpetuates the suffering inherent in existence. Consider, for instance, the simple fact of hunger. We might think of hunger as something that only affects us individually when we feel hungry. We experience it as our own personal discomfort. But hunger, in Schopenhauer's framework, is not just an individual experience. It is a manifestation of the same will that drives all living creatures to survive. When an animal feels hunger, it is no different from when a human feels hunger. The suffering that arises from this need to sustain life is a common thread that runs through all beings, uniting us in a shared experience of existence. The distinction between individual hunger and the hunger of another is merely an illusion created by the mind. In this way, Schopenhauer suggests that all suffering is interconnected. Our struggles, whether they involve physical pain, emotional distress, or existential crisis, are not isolated experiences but part of a broader cosmic pattern. The conflicts we face in life, the desires we chase after, and the pain we endure are expressions of the same force at work in the universe. This universal will to live is both the cause of suffering and the condition of existence itself. But how does this perspective change the way we view ourselves and others? For Schopenhauer, recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings through the will to live can lead to a deeper sense of compassion. If we understand that our suffering is not unique but shared by all living things, we might begin to see the lives of others in a different light. The person who seems to be an obstacle in our path, or the stranger who causes us distress, is not truly separate from us. They are, in essence, a reflection of the same will that drives us. This realization can soften the harshness of conflict and reduce the tendency to view others as mere competitors or enemies. This is particularly relevant in the context of interpersonal relationships. Much of human conflict arises from the belief in the separateness of individuals. We view others as distinct, separate entities with their own desires, goals, and needs, and this creates friction when our desires conflict with theirs. But Schopenhauer's idea of the illusion of individuality invites us to reconsider this approach. Instead of seeing ourselves as isolated beings locked in competition with one another, we can recognize that our desires and struggles are, in a sense, the same. The same will that drives our desire for success, love, or security also drives the desires of those around us. This recognition does not make suffering go away, but it can shift our perspective on it. Instead of seeing others as obstacles to our goals, we can see them as fellow sufferers, each struggling with the same existential forces. To illustrate this, let's consider a more everyday example: the experience of jealousy. When we feel jealous of someone else's success, it's easy to believe that their achievements are somehow separate from us. We may feel that their success diminishes our own, or that it somehow threatens our sense of self-worth. But if we take Schopenhauer's philosophy seriously, we might recognize that the feeling of jealousy arises not from the actions of others, but from the same underlying will that drives both us and them. Their success is a reflection of the same cosmic force that drives our own desires. The jealousy we feel is not an isolated, individual experience, but part of the universal suffering that all beings share. In this sense, jealousy becomes less about the other person and more about our shared struggle for survival and recognition. Schopenhauer's idea of the illusion of individuality also has profound implications for the way we view the world itself. Our sense of separateness from nature, from the animals, and from the environment is part of the same illusion. In truth, we are all part of a larger web of life, connected through the same fundamental will. Just as a wave on the ocean may crash on the shore and then recede, only to rise again, so too are our lives part of an ongoing cycle of existence. We may perceive ourselves as separate, but at a deeper level, we are all manifestations of the same cosmic force, each playing our role in the grand drama of life. In this light, Schopenhauer's philosophy invites us to reconsider our relationship with nature and the world around us. If we recognize that all beings are manifestations of the same will to live, we may develop a deeper respect for other creatures and the environment. Our actions, driven by our own desires, may have consequences that ripple out into the world, affecting others in ways we might not immediately see. The suffering of the natural world, the destruction of habitats, the extinction of species, the pollution of the earth is not separate from our own suffering. It is part of the same cosmic process that governs our existence. The concept of the illusion of individuality also has important ethical implications. If we are all connected through the will to live, And if all suffering is part of the same universal pattern, then perhaps our ethical responsibility extends beyond ourselves. Rather than focusing solely on our own desires and needs, we might begin to recognize our responsibility to others, to nature, and to the world itself. Our actions, driven by our own desires, can have a ripple effect on the lives of others, both human and non-human. The suffering of others is not something we can ignore. It is, in a sense, our own suffering as well. This realization calls for a greater sense of empathy, compassion, and responsibility, grounded not in moralism but in the recognition of our shared existence. Ultimately, Schopenhauer's view of the illusion of individuality offers a sobering but potentially liberating perspective on life. By recognizing that our sense of separateness is an illusion, we can begin to see our struggles as part of a larger, interconnected whole. This understanding of the world where all beings are manifestations of the same will to live can lead to greater empathy, compassion, and a deeper appreciation for the shared nature of human and non-human suffering. Rather than seeing others as obstacles to our success, we can begin to see them as fellow travelers on the same existential journey, each struggling in their own way to navigate the will to live that defines existence itself. In this recognition, there may be a path toward greater peace, acceptance, and understanding. Schopenhauer's philosophy presents a somber yet strikingly accurate view of human nature, particularly concerning the role of desire in our lives. According to Schopenhauer, desire is not just an incidental aspect of human existence, but the very essence of it. From the moment we are born, our lives are shaped by a constant yearning, whether for survival, comfort, success, love, or meaning. These desires push us forward, drive our actions, and define the course of our lives. Yet, paradoxically, they never bring us lasting happiness. Instead, Schopenhauer argues, they entrap us in an endless cycle of craving and frustration, a cycle that is as inevitable as it is painful. At first glance, it might seem that the fulfillment of our desires should bring satisfaction. We are often led to believe that if we just achieve our goals, whether that's securing a promotion at work, buying the car we've always wanted, or finding true love, we will finally experience happiness. However, Schopenhauer's insight into the nature of desire suggests otherwise. Even when we succeed in obtaining what we long for, satisfaction is brief, and the sense of fulfillment quickly fades. The happiness we derive from fulfilling one desire is almost immediately replaced by the emergence of another, equally compelling craving. This cycle continues endlessly, leaving us forever chasing after something just out of reach. Think about the way we approach material success. Many people spend their entire lives working towards financial security or the accumulation of wealth, believing that once they achieve this goal, they will be content. But even when this desire is realized, the happiness that comes with it is often fleeting. For instance, someone who works tirelessly to buy their dream home may feel a temporary sense of joy and accomplishment upon moving in. Yet, over time, the novelty of the house wears off, and a new desire emerges, perhaps the need to furnish the home with the latest designer furniture, or to buy an even larger property. The house becomes a symbol not of fulfillment, but of the new desires that have taken its place. This is the tragic reality of desire. It never truly satisfies. Schopenhauer's view is rooted in a fundamental understanding of human nature. He observes that we are not content with the present moment. Instead, we are driven by a need for something else, something that we lack. This is true not just for material desires, but for emotional and existential ones as well. When we find love, we may initially feel elated, but over time, we start to fear losing that love, or perhaps we crave deeper intimacy or validation. The same pattern emerges in friendships, family dynamics, and even in our relationship with ourselves. We seek approval, recognition, success, or a sense of purpose. And even when we achieve these things, we are rarely content for long. New desires replace the old ones, and the cycle of striving continues. Schopenhauer's analysis of desire leads to a deeply pessimistic conclusion that true happiness is unattainable. Happiness, as most people conceive it, is always just out of reach. forever pursued but never fully realized. Our desires create a state of perpetual dissatisfaction, as they are not only never fully fulfilled, but are often themselves unfulfilled in ways we cannot control. The pain of unfulfilled desire is a constant theme in Schopenhauer's philosophy, and it has wide-ranging implications for how we view our lives and our relationships with others. Consider the modern example of social media. Many people today are trapped in a constant cycle of comparison, seeking approval and validation from others in the form of likes, comments, and followers. Social media platforms are designed to amplify desires. Users are encouraged to show off their successes, curate the most idealized versions of their lives, and chase after ever-increasing numbers of followers or likes. However, as Schopenhauer would predict, this pursuit of external validation does not lead to lasting happiness. Once a certain milestone is reached, it quickly becomes insufficient, and a new craving takes its place. A person who achieves 1,000 followers may feel a momentary sense of achievement, but soon that number seems too small, and the drive for even more followers takes over. Each step forward merely creates the space for the next desire to arise, perpetuating the cycle of dissatisfaction. This phenomenon is not limited to social media. It is, in fact, a characteristic of human existence itself. The pursuit of status, wealth, pleasure, and even personal growth is constantly fueled by desire. It's worth noting that Schopenhauer's philosophy does not suggest that desire is inherently bad. It is simply a fundamental aspect of existence that cannot be eliminated. What he points out, however, is that the fulfillment of our desires does not bring about the enduring contentment that we expect. Instead, it is the very act of desiring and the ongoing pursuit of unattainable goals that creates suffering. Another compelling example of this cycle of desire and frustration can be found in the way we experience time. Most people are conditioned to view the future as the key to their happiness. We work toward goals that we hope will bring us satisfaction: graduating from school, landing a dream job, getting married, having children. Yet, when we finally reach these milestones, the sense of accomplishment is often short-lived. Once achieved, the satisfaction quickly fades, and we begin to focus on the next goal. The passage of time is always accompanied by new desires that emerge to replace the old ones. The joy of accomplishing something can never be sustained because the mind is always searching for the next thing to want, the next step to take. Schopenhauer's view of desire is not merely a commentary on the human condition. It also offers a profound insight into the nature of suffering. In Schopenhauer's view, suffering is not simply the result of external circumstances such as poverty, illness, or loss, but is a direct consequence of our inner nature, which is driven by endless desire. Our inability to achieve lasting satisfaction stems from the very nature of desire itself. Desire is not just the craving for objects or experiences. It is a manifestation of a deeper, existential dissatisfaction. It is the feeling that something is always missing, that life is always incomplete, and that we are always striving towards something that, in the end, will not provide the lasting peace we seek. In fact, Schopenhauer goes so far as to argue that this condition of perpetual striving is, in many ways, the source of much human suffering. The human experience, as he sees it, is marked by this constant dissatisfaction, whether we are longing for something we do not have or fearing the loss of what we do possess. The tension between desire and fulfillment, between wanting something and getting it, is what creates the emotional turmoil that defines much of human life. And even when we achieve what we desire, we find that it does not bring the peace or happiness we anticipated. Schopenhauer's philosophy challenges the modern, Western ideal of self-improvement and the belief that happiness can be attained through the pursuit of goals. In many ways, the entire framework of modern society are capitalist economies. Our focus on individual achievement, our obsession with success and self-help reinforces the cycle of desire that Schopenhauer describes. We are encouraged to constantly strive for more, to measure our success by the accumulation of wealth, status, and material possessions, and to believe that happiness lies just beyond our current reach. But Schopenhauer's message is clear. happiness cannot be found in the fulfillment of our desires, because the fulfillment of desires only leads to new desires. This leaves us trapped in a never-ending cycle of striving and dissatisfaction. As long as we continue to view happiness as the result of external achievements, whether they be personal, professional, or material, we will remain forever dissatisfied, forever chasing something that always eludes us. So, what does this mean for how we live our lives? Schopenhauer's philosophy does not merely present a bleak or fatalistic view of the human condition. It also offers an invitation to reconsider our relationship with desire itself. If true happiness is unattainable through the fulfillment of desire, then perhaps the answer lies in transcending desire altogether. This does not mean abandoning all ambition or renouncing the pursuit of meaningful goals, but rather recognizing the impermanence of the desires we chase and accepting that they will never provide lasting satisfaction. In this acceptance, Schopenhauer believes, lies a deeper form of peace, one that is not dependent on the fleeting fulfillment of our desires, but on the quiet understanding that life itself is not about achieving endless goals, but about accepting the inherent dissatisfaction that comes with existence. Through this acceptance, we may find a form of peace that transcends the endless cycle of desire, a peace that comes from living in harmony with the inevitability of life's struggles and imperfections. Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a stark and uncompromising perspective on the human condition, particularly the notion that we are forever ensnared in a cycle of desire, striving, and dissatisfaction. Yet, within this bleak worldview, Schopenhauer proposes two means of escaping or, at the very least, temporarily transcending this cycle: aesthetic experience and asceticism. Both of these concepts, though seemingly disparate, share a common thread of denial of the will to live, which, according to Schopenhauer, is the root of all suffering. Through these pathways, Schopenhauer envisions a way for individuals to momentarily escape the constant tug of desire and find brief but profound relief. The first of these means, aesthetic experience, is rooted in the contemplation of beauty, whether through art, nature, or music. Schopenhauer believed that when we engage deeply with something beautiful, we temporarily break free from the incessant demands of our desires. In these moments, we experience a kind of pure, unself-conscious being, untainted by the restless striving that typically governs our thoughts and actions. This immersion in beauty offers us a momentary reprieve from the tyranny of the will, a brief but profound escape into a state of calm and peace. To understand the importance of aesthetic experience in Schopenhauer's philosophy, it's useful to consider how we typically experience the world. Most of our daily lives are shaped by a relentless pursuit of goals driven by desire. Whether we are striving for wealth, success, love, or pleasure, we are constantly pushing forward, perpetually focused on the next thing that we believe will bring us satisfaction. Yet, Schopenhauer suggests that this never-ending cycle of wanting only perpetuates our dissatisfaction. We are locked in a state of tension, always yearning for something more. However, when we encounter something truly beautiful, whether a painting, a piece of music, or the beauty of a sunset, something remarkable happens. In these moments, we become absorbed in the experience itself, and the constant chatter of desire fades into the background. Schopenhauer describes this as a kind of pure contemplation, where the individual is no longer focused on themselves or their needs, but rather on the object of beauty itself. For a brief moment, we are freed from the constraints of the will, and the constant pull of desire is suspended. Take, for example, a visit to a museum. As you stand before a masterpiece of art, perhaps a painting by Van Gogh or a sculpture by Michelangelo, you may find yourself lost in the work, feeling a deep sense of awe and appreciation. In that moment, you are not thinking about your job, your financial concerns, or your personal desires. You are simply present with the art, and the experience becomes one of pure aesthetic pleasure. This, according to Schopenhauer, is a temporary liberation from the will. It is a fleeting escape, but it offers something profound: peace, clarity, and a sense of oneness with the world. Schopenhauer's emphasis on aesthetic experience as a means of transcending the will connects to his broader metaphysical view that the world is an expression of the same underlying force, the will to live. When we engage with beauty, whether in nature or in human creations, we momentarily connect with something that transcends the individual self. The experience of beauty is not tainted by the desires of the ego, and for a short time, we step outside of the constant cycle of striving that defines our daily lives. This experience, Schopenhauer argues, offers us the only genuine respite from the pain of desire. However, aesthetic experience alone cannot provide a permanent solution to the problem of suffering. While moments of beauty can offer us temporary peace, they do not fundamentally alter the nature of existence, which is driven by the relentless will to live. For Schopenhauer, the ultimate escape from suffering requires a deeper, more radical renunciation, a renunciation of desire itself. This leads to the second path he proposes, asceticism. Asceticism, in Schopenhauer's view, is the voluntary renunciation of worldly desires and attachments. It is not enough, in his view, to simply experience beauty. One must actively reject the desires that constantly pull us toward material goals, sensory pleasures, and even the desire for self-preservation. For Schopenhauer, the path to true liberation involves a radical turn inward, where we renounce the very basis of our desires, the will to live. This renunciation, while difficult and counterintuitive in a world that places such a high value on success, pleasure, and self-fulfillment, is presented by Schopenhauer as the most direct route to peace. Asceticism, Schopenhauer argues, offers a way to break free from the endless cycle of striving. By rejecting the pursuit of wealth, comfort, and sensual pleasure, an individual can begin to detach from the will that drives them. This does not mean abandoning all human needs, but rather refraining from overindulgence and the obsessive pursuit of material gain. Schopenhauer suggests that by living more simply and focusing on spiritual and intellectual pursuits, individuals can reduce the power of the will over them and achieve a sense of tranquility and inner peace. One of the most striking aspects of Schopenhauer's asceticism is his alignment with certain religious and spiritual traditions, particularly Buddhism. Like Buddhism, Schopenhauer acknowledges that desire is the root of suffering, and that liberation from suffering can only be achieved by renouncing attachment and craving. In Buddhism, the path to enlightenment involves the cessation of desire and the cultivation of detachment from worldly things. Similarly, Schopenhauer believes that the denial of the will to live through ascetic practices can lead to a profound sense of peace and freedom from the cycle of suffering. Consider the example of a monk living in a Buddhist monastery. The monk has renounced worldly possessions, material wealth, and sensual pleasures, dedicating their life instead to meditation, study, and service to others. While this life may seem austere and even extreme by modern standards, it offers the monk a form of peace that is unavailable to those who remain ensnared in the pursuit of desire. By detaching from worldly attachments, the monk is able to transcend the cycle of striving and desire, finding a sense of tranquility that comes not from external success or pleasure, but from internal peace. Schopenhauer's philosophy echoes this model, suggesting that renunciation, whether through asceticism or simply through cultivating detachment from desires, can bring about a deeper sense of fulfillment than the endless chasing of material or personal goals. However, Schopenhauer's radical solution to suffering through asceticism may not be practical or desirable for everyone. In a world that prioritizes personal success, pleasure, and wealth, the idea of renouncing desire entirely can seem unappealing. The very structure of society encourages us to strive, achieve, and accumulate. Moreover, the notion of asceticism conflicts with the cultural values of individualism and self-realization that dominate much of the modern world. Schopenhauer himself acknowledges that this path may not be for everyone. Not all individuals are willing or able to embrace such radical renunciation. Yet, Schopenhauer's message remains powerful, particularly as a critique of modern life. In a world where success, pleasure, and the accumulation of material goods are often seen as the ultimate goals, Schopenhauer invites us to question this pursuit. He challenges the assumption that happiness can be found through the fulfillment of desires, and instead proposes that true peace lies in the denial of the will, the renunciation of constant striving and attachment. The idea of asceticism, though radical, offers a counterpoint to the prevailing wisdom that pleasure, success, and material wealth are the keys to happiness. While few may be willing to adopt the extreme path of asceticism that Schopenhauer advocates, his ideas offer an interesting reflection on the nature of desire and the possibility of finding fulfillment in something other than the pursuit of worldly goals. Whether through the temporary respite offered by aesthetic experiences or through a more radical renunciation of desire, Schopenhauer offers a way out of the endless cycle of suffering that defines human existence. In this sense, his philosophy is not merely a bleak picture of the human condition, but a call to reconsider what truly matters in life and what it means to live a life of peace and fulfillment. Schopenhauer's conception of resignation stands as the final, most radical solution to the problem of human suffering. In his view, the core of human existence is inextricably tied to suffering, driven by the ceaseless striving and desire that define our lives. The very nature of the will to live, which pushes us toward endless wants, ambitions, and goals, is inherently destructive. It leads to a constant state of tension, dissatisfaction, and frustration, where no matter what we achieve, we are left yearning for more. To escape this endless cycle of striving and suffering, Schopenhauer proposes resignation, a profound acceptance of the world as it is, in all its inherent suffering and imperfection. Resignation is not about passive surrender to the injustices of life, nor is it about giving up on life altogether. It is, rather, an active, conscious choice to relinquish the relentless pursuit of desires and goals. This means accepting that life is full of suffering and that, no matter how hard we try, we cannot escape the inevitable truths of aging, illness, and death. Rather than seeking to change the world or our circumstances, resignation requires us to acknowledge the futility of this striving and embrace the present moment with equanimity. For Schopenhauer, this acceptance of the world and its suffering is not a form of nihilism, but rather a path to peace. To resign oneself is to free oneself from the tyranny of the will. This liberation comes not through the fulfillment of desires, but through their abandonment. Resignation involves letting go of the pursuit of personal happiness, success, and worldly accomplishments. It is an act of renunciation, one that aligns closely with Schopenhauer's advocacy of asceticism and the rejection of material wealth and comfort. By relinquishing the will, we can find a peace that is not contingent on external circumstances, but is instead rooted in the acceptance of life as it is. In essence, Schopenhauer's resignation is a form of wisdom, a recognition that suffering is an inevitable part of the human condition, and that our constant attempts to outrun or escape it are futile. While this may sound like a bleak or despairing conclusion, Schopenhauer views resignation as a kind of liberation. He acknowledges that the human desire to overcome suffering is deeply ingrained. Yet he contends that true freedom lies not in the achievement of desires, but in their abandonment. In resignation, one becomes free from the endless cycle of striving that defines much of human existence. One of the most profound aspects of Schopenhauer's idea of resignation is the way it challenges the conventional wisdom of modern life. In a world that values achievement, success, and the constant pursuit of happiness, Schopenhauer's emphasis on renunciation and acceptance may seem counterintuitive, even extreme. The prevailing cultural narrative promotes the idea that happiness and fulfillment can be attained through material success, career advancement, personal relationships, or self-improvement. This worldview encourages us to constantly strive, push forward, and pursue more, believing that satisfaction is just one more achievement away. Schopenhauer, however, flips this narrative on its head, suggesting that our very striving for happiness is the source of our dissatisfaction. The more we chase after desires, the more we entrench ourselves in a cycle of endless wanting, leading to frustration and suffering. Take the example of a person who works tirelessly to achieve a promotion at work, believing that this will bring them the fulfillment and happiness they desire. Once the promotion is achieved, they find that the satisfaction is fleeting soon. New challenges and goals arise, and the same dissatisfaction sets in. This cycle continues, with the person constantly striving for the next rung on the ladder, yet never fully content with what they have. According to Schopenhauer, the very pursuit of these goals that are driven by the will leads to perpetual dissatisfaction. Resignation, in this case, would mean accepting that no external accomplishment or material possession will bring lasting contentment, and finding peace in the present moment, without the need for further achievement. Resignation also involves accepting the inevitability of death. Schopenhauer's philosophy places a strong emphasis on the reality of death as an inescapable aspect of human life. Death, like suffering, is a natural part of the cycle of existence, and it cannot be avoided or postponed. Rather than living in denial of death or trying to escape its reality, Schopenhauer urges us to embrace it as part of the larger pattern of life. This acceptance of death is not meant to encourage passivity or despair, but to foster a more profound appreciation for the present moment and for life itself. In the face of death, Schopenhauer believes we can find a deeper sense of peace, not by avoiding it, but by accepting it as an inevitable part of the human experience. Schopenhauer's concept of resignation shares similarities with other philosophical and religious traditions that emphasize the renunciation of desire and attachment. In many ways, it mirrors the teachings of Buddhism, which also advocates for the cessation of craving as the path to liberation. The Buddha taught that desire is the root of suffering and that by relinquishing attachment to desires, one can achieve a state of enlightenment, free from the cycle of suffering and rebirth. Schopenhauer's resignation is akin to this Buddhist ideal of detachment, but with a more pronounced focus on the acceptance of suffering as a fundamental aspect of life. Both philosophies recognize that the pursuit of desires leads to endless dissatisfaction, and that true peace comes not from the fulfillment of wants, but from their transcendence. This notion of resignation as a form of liberation is exemplified by the lives of ascetics and saints throughout history, who have embraced simplicity, solitude, and self-denial in their quest for inner peace. For example, many monastic traditions emphasize renunciation of the material world, viewing attachment to wealth, pleasure, and status as obstacles to spiritual fulfillment. The ascetic life, while austere and demanding, is seen as a path to liberation from the bonds of worldly desires. Schopenhauer would argue that these individuals have found a form of peace that is not dependent on external circumstances, but on their internal ability to renounce the will. It is important to note that resignation does not imply a complete rejection of all human activity. Schopenhauer does not advocate for a life of total inaction or detachment from the world. Rather, resignation involves a shift in attitude or recognition that striving for personal fulfillment and worldly success is ultimately futile, and that true peace lies in the acceptance of life as it is. This acceptance does not require one to abandon all action, but to approach life with a sense of detachment from the outcome, understanding that suffering is an inherent part of the human condition. The goal is not to eliminate suffering, but to cease fighting against it, to let go of the desire to control and manipulate the world in the pursuit of happiness. In this sense, Schopenhauer's idea of resignation is not about resignation to a life of passivity or despair, but rather an active embrace of the present moment and a conscious choice to let go of the constant drive for more. It is a path to peace that comes not from achieving external goals, but from accepting the world as it is, with all its imperfections, suffering, and inevitable end. By relinquishing the will to live, Schopenhauer believes we can transcend the cycle of desire and suffering and find a deeper sense of tranquility. While resignation may seem like an extreme or even undesirable solution to many, it offers a radical critique of the values and assumptions that underpin modern life. In a culture that prizes success, achievement, and the pursuit of personal happiness, Schopenhauer's philosophy invites us to question whether this constant striving truly leads to fulfillment. In his view, the relentless pursuit of desires only keeps us locked in a cycle of dissatisfaction and suffering. The path to peace, according to Schopenhauer, lies not in fulfilling desires, but in transcending them. in accepting the world as it is and finding serenity in the present moment. Schopenhauer's resignation is a call to step back from the frantic pace of modern life and to reconsider what truly brings peace and fulfillment. It is not an invitation to withdraw from the world, but a challenge to shift our focus away from the endless pursuit of external achievements and toward a more profound, internal peace. In this way, resignation becomes not a defeat, but a liberation, a way to free ourselves from the constant demands of the will and find peace in the acceptance of the world's inherent suffering and imperfection. Schopenhauer's philosophy, with its stark and often unsettling view of life, stands as both a critique of modern society and a profound challenge to our conventional understanding of happiness. His ideas push us to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth: that human existence is primarily characterized by suffering, and the pursuit of happiness is, at its core, a futile and ultimately unfulfilling endeavor. Yet, within this bleak perspective, Schopenhauer offers something that might seem paradoxical: hope. It is not hope in the conventional sense, where we expect to find a perfect or even tolerable world, but hope in the form of awareness and acceptance of life as it is. Through this acceptance, Schopenhauer suggests that we can find a path to peace that is not dependent on the fulfillment of desires or external success. Schopenhauer's worldview challenges the very fabric of the modern obsession with happiness, achievement, and material success. In contemporary culture, we are constantly bombarded with messages that promote the idea that happiness can be achieved through wealth, status, or the fulfillment of personal desires. The pursuit of these goals has become a driving force for many people, and success in these areas is often equated with happiness. Schopenhauer, however, flips this narrative. He argues that the more we pursue happiness through these external means, the more entrenched we become in suffering. The relentless striving for something that always seems just out of reach, the new promotion, the perfect relationship, the bigger house or better car, creates a cycle of desire that can never truly be satisfied. This insight forces us to reconsider our approach to life, challenging us to look beyond the surface-level pursuit of happiness and examine the deeper forces that drive us. One of Schopenhauer's most powerful contributions to philosophical thought is his emphasis on the futility of desire. He explains that the core of human suffering lies in our endless striving for things that, in the end, do not bring lasting fulfillment. The more we desire, the more we set ourselves up for dissatisfaction. Each fulfilled desire is quickly replaced by a new one, creating an unbreakable cycle of wanting and frustration. This cycle perpetuates suffering and leaves us with a sense of emptiness, regardless of how much we achieve or possess. Schopenhauer's view suggests that happiness is an illusion, one that we are constantly chasing but never quite attaining. The more we pursue it, the more we suffer from its unattainability. This insight can be both freeing and disorienting, for it reveals the futility of much of what drives modern life. Yet, Schopenhauer does not leave us without a way forward. His solution to the problem of suffering is not to abandon life, but to embrace it with full awareness of its inevitable hardships. He advocates for resignation, the conscious acceptance of the world as it is, with all its suffering and imperfection. This does not mean giving up or withdrawing from life. Rather, it means letting go of the futile attempts to change things that cannot be changed. It is an active choice to cease striving for the impossible and to accept the present moment as it is. In doing so, we release ourselves from the constant pressure to achieve, acquire, and satisfy desires, and find peace in the act of simply being. Schopenhauer's idea of resignation has much in common with practices found in many spiritual traditions, particularly Buddhism, which also teaches that suffering arises from desire and that liberation comes through the cessation of craving. Like the Buddhist path to enlightenment, Schopenhauer's philosophy suggests that peace can be found not by continuing to chase after external goals, but by renouncing the pursuit of desires altogether. This is a radical shift in thinking. It challenges the very foundation of the modern worldview, which holds that success, wealth, and the fulfillment of personal desires are the key to a good life. Schopenhauer's wisdom, however, offers an alternative, that true peace comes from letting go of the need to constantly strive for more. For those of us who cannot fully abandon the pursuit of worldly goals or desires, Schopenhauer provides another means of navigating life's suffering. He emphasizes the importance of aesthetic experiences, moments of immersion in beauty, art, music, and nature. These moments offer a temporary respite from the relentless pull of desire. When we encounter something beautiful, whether in a painting, a piece of music, or the natural world, we are momentarily transported beyond the cycle of craving and suffering. In these moments, we experience a sense of pure being, free from the demands of the will. While these experiences are fleeting, they offer a glimpse of a different way of being, a way that is not dependent on the fulfillment of desires or the achievement of external goals. Schopenhauer's appreciation for art and beauty can be seen as part of his larger vision of how we might transcend the suffering inherent in existence. In art, we find a kind of universal truth that transcends the individual's desires and struggles. The artist's work, whether it is a painting, a symphony, or a poem, represents an expression of the world that allows us to step outside ourselves and momentarily forget the burdens of our own desires. Schopenhauer sees art as a way of accessing a higher state of consciousness, one that offers brief but meaningful relief from the constant pressures of the will. This form of transcendence, while temporary, offers a profound sense of peace, even if only for a short time. In addition to the aesthetic experience, Schopenhauer advocates for asceticism, the rejection of worldly pleasures and material desires, as another way of dealing with suffering. By renouncing attachment to wealth, status, and physical pleasure, the ascetic can attain a sense of peace that is independent of external circumstances. Asceticism, however, is not a universally accessible or desirable solution for everyone, nor is it an easy path. It requires a level of self-discipline and a radical departure from the values of mainstream society. Yet, for those who are willing to follow this path, it offers a way to break free from the cycle of desire and suffering. While Schopenhauer's philosophy may not provide a clear-cut roadmap for achieving happiness in the traditional sense, it offers a framework for understanding and confronting the reality of suffering. It challenges us to look beyond the superficial pursuits of wealth, success, and status, and to recognize that true peace comes not from fulfilling desires, but from accepting the world as it is. In this way, Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a form of wisdom that is both timeless and relevant to our contemporary experience. In a world that often seems dominated by the pursuit of happiness and material success, Schopenhauer's ideas invite us to consider a different path, one that involves embracing life with full awareness of its hardships, while finding peace in the present moment. Through this acceptance, we may discover that true freedom and peace lie not in the fulfillment of desires, but in the transcendence of them. Well, there you have it, a deep dive into Schopenhauer's philosophy and its radical take on life, suffering, and the pursuit of happiness. It's not exactly a cheerful perspective, but what if, just maybe, it's the truth we all need to hear? The idea that embracing life's suffering might be the key to liberation could completely change the way you look at your daily struggles. I hope this video sparked something in you, whether it's a fresh perspective on the human experience or a new way to think about what truly matters in life. But here's the thing. This philosophy isn't for everyone. It's challenging, it's uncomfortable, and it might even be a little depressing, but it's also powerful. And that's why I wanted to share it with you today. If you found this video interesting, make sure to hit that like button and share it with someone who might benefit from Schopenhauer's bold, yet insightful ideas. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's a lot more content on the way that'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about life. Lastly, if you really appreciate what we're doing here and want to support the channel, consider dropping a super thanks. Your contribution helps keep this channel running and allows us to bring more content that challenges your thinking. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the truth about life might not always be pretty, but it's always worth exploring. Until next time, take care and stay curious.